So my name's Yohann. I've just turned 39. I was born in France, so I grew up in the north of France. I attended public school in the 90s, and this is where I started to learn English. So this is an extremely common European experience. Basically, I didn't go to any sort of private school. I didn't go to a language academy or anything of the sort. I just went to a regular public school in a very rural settings. I had very few opportunities to have any kind of contact with English or with any other language that was not French. English classes were very basic. You had the typical that I'm sure many of you experienced before, crowded classrooms, very few opportunities to speak, lack of training from most teachers, focus on writing more than speaking. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, right? So the consequence of that is that while I was a pretty good student, I was terrified when it came to speaking. Like speaking was a nightmare because you had 25 kids around you, and if you tried to speak, of course, everybody would be mocking you. Everybody would making fun of the way you spoke. So you just shut up and you do the writing exercises, right? Again, I'm sure you know that experience. I mean, I was very much interested in French language and literature at the time, but I ended up deciding I wanted to study English because I thought it would give me more job opportunities outside of teaching. I was convinced I would never become a teacher, ever. Right. Well, here I am today, obviously. Once I arrived in college, obviously, that was a very big shock to me because the level of expectation was way higher compared to what they wanted in my tiny little village in northern France. So it was an absolute disaster. I almost failed my first year, basically, of studies. My teachers were telling me, your English is terrible. You absolutely need to do something about it. And I will always remember that some teachers were telling us, you need to go spend some time abroad. You need to go spend some time in England. And you know, we were 18, 19, we could barely feed ourselves. And they wanted us to go to England. You know, that was the key to everything. If you want to speak better, if you want to actually pass this year, you need to go to England. So I remember thinking that England was a bit like the El Dorado. You know, you have to go to England to become a proficient speaker. Like, no England, no degree. Well, guess what? I didn't go to England actually in the end. That's the funny thing, because I simply could not afford it. So I had to find other ways to just get by, you know, and survive. And it was really tough because I was told, oh, you really have interesting things to say, but your pronunciation is terrible. Like we barely understand you when you speak. You need to do something about this. We had a few classes about phonics and everything, but nothing really serious. And I don't think at the time I was actually able to understand the value of some of the things that were taught to us. I don't know if it's because I was too young or because I did not have the right kind of formal training, but I think I kind of missed the purpose of all of this. So I was able to get by eventually. Now, I'm not going to lie. What saved me was not the language classes. It was the literature classes. It was the history classes. That's the stuff I was good at. So I was an English student that sucked at English, basically. I was good at literary analysis. I was really good at culture and all of this, but grammar, linguistics, I was really not good. So problems, of course, kept piling up, because then I started my master's degree after finishing my bachelor's. And now, you know, you were doing something really serious. You had to write in English. You had to communicate with native speakers all of the time. You had to go and directly speak to writers, for example. So you had to speak. You had no other choice. So this is when basically through, you know, having more contacts with native speakers and starting to understand the use of the IPA chart, for example, among other tools, I started to understand that this could really help me, and that the thing I had been missing all of this time is that I did not understand the system of the language. Nobody came to me and said, look, you need to understand that your native language doesn't work the same way as that language. You need to stop trying to find those bridges between the languages, because this is actually detrimental to the way you're acquiring the language. So you need to understand that the system is completely different. And once you get that, once you've got those different parameters, you can put everything together and start speaking better. And this took me an absolutely ridiculous amount of time to understand that. And I'm a bit disappointed, because there's one part of me that is thinking, shouldn't my teachers be teaching me that? And there's another part of me that is thinking, but that was kind of my responsibility also to seek those resources. So I still don't know what to think to this day, but what I know now is that I don't want my students to go through the same thing. I want to find ways for my students to understand that system, basically, before they face this humiliation of being told, we don't understand you when you speak, or wow, your pronunciation is not great, or I don't want anybody to go through that. I don't want any of my students to get mocked or to get bullied because of the way they speak. I want them to feel comfortable. I want them to feel like they're understood, they can communicate, they can express the things they have to express. That's really, this has become basically my target, because I went through that as a non-native speaker. I think this is a very important point, okay, in the conversation we're going to have with Lisa, because our experience is radically different. Like, Lisa became an expert of English in a very different way compared to what I had to go through, obviously. Her challenges were not my challenges. And so we were talking about this actually with her like a week ago. So that's a very interesting part. So I did my master's degree. Guess what? I survived and everything. And this is when I was able to start my PhD after that. And I was like, English is really cool. I want to do a PhD. So I started doing my PhD. And guess what? I never went to England. I went to the United States. This is where I did my PhD program. I spent 3 years in Atlanta, Georgia, at Georgia State University. I was a visiting scholar in there, and things changed. That was yet obviously another level of understanding, because anytime I had an actual question about the language or something I did not understand, I could just go ask a fellow expert in the English department. So not only did I have access to native speakers, I had like experts of English who could really help me with that. So that was really helpful. So is the key to be around native speakers? Well, in part, there is something that we can definitely learn from native speakers. It's very important. But more than anything, I do believe that the key is to understand the system of the language and to get the right kind of things need to be shown to you in a very organized fashion. If not, you will feel very impressed. You will feel very puzzled probably by everything, because there is so much to do. It's like you start understanding one aspect of the language and suddenly something else starts showing. Okay, so it's very important to have a very systematic approach and to work with people who are able to point out the areas of improvement that you have. I think those are the keys, but we will talk about this more in detail with Lisa. So after that, I finished my PhD program. I was starting to feel way more comfortable because I had mastered those different aspects. And this is when I started developing this desire to actually share this knowledge and to be like, you know what took me maybe 25 years? Could it be possible to condense all of this and to make it available for people, and they could understand this in a couple of months, maybe? You know, if you're an intermediate plus learner, can you understand this series of elements, basically put the pieces together like a jigsaw puzzle, and actually end up speaking better, and more than speaking better, feel more comfortable about the language? So this is the kind of this is my target, let's say, with my clients. And I think Lisa and I are very similar in this way. We like to go slow. We like to take our time. We don't rush things. We don't make empty promises of, you will magically be able to speak English. No, we know it's difficult. We know it's a struggle, but we also understand that this very systematic approach is very often the key to progress. So that's for you to know a bit about my background, basically.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Right. Can I just say, I realized that I actually pronounced your name wrong when you introduced yourself.
This is
That's a good
the
start, isn't it?
Lisa, this is the ever-going debate. How should you pronounce my name? Because I could pronounce it the French way, and that would be Yohann. That's cool
Okay.
if you want to call me Yohann, but very few people actually call me that. So Johann is completely fine. I like it. That's great.
Johann, right? Okay. You see, but that's it, isn't it? That got me thinking that we recognize letters and patterns of letters together that make sense to us in our own language, and we transfer that pronunciation onto other
Mm,
languages, which is
absolutely.
exactly what I did. I saw a Y and an O, and I was like, "Yo, it's Yo, not Joe."
Yeah.
So yeah, right, okay, great, right, well, right. There's a lot to unpack there, I think, and
Yeah.
you've definitely had an interesting journey. And what I love about your story is that you it's evidence that you can do it. Anybody can do it if you've got the motivation and the desire to do it. You can do it. And one of the things I think that we have to do is, like you said, is identify all those stories that are complete rubbish that people tell us, like you have to go and live in the country to learn the language. You have to speak like a native speaker. We've talked about this a lot, haven't we?
Yeah.
You don't need to sound like a native speaker. And what does a native speaker sound like anyway? So I know that one of the things we share in common, apart from going slowly, is um you know keeping your own identity, because why on earth would you not want to be yourself just because you're speaking a different language? So Cinta, don't worry, that's okay. It's will be recorded. You can catch up later. um so yeah. So your mission is to help learners so they don't
Mm,
suffer like you suffered. And it doesn't, even though we go slowly, we don't want to go too slowly and
yeah.
maybe take 25 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, which was my experience with confidence. It took me so many years to feel confident speaking a language that
Yeah.
I was just like, my learners can't suffer the way I suffered. This is just ridiculous. you
Yeah.
know
Yeah. Yeah.
so, what kind of strategies or techniques do you use with your learners? I know you talked about having a systematic approach.
Mm,
Can
mm.
you can you give us a few ideas?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first step that really I would say everyone has to go through when they start working with me is develop like an awareness of those basic elements of the language. The first one is basically all the sounds that you should be expected to understand and to produce. Because learners have two main issues. They invent sounds that they should not be using. They transpose sound from their language, for example, and they are not aware that other sounds exist and that they should also be using them. So it's very important to set the score right from the beginning and to tell them, okay, this is where you should more or less be. And your eyes, for example, should be in this box or in that box. You cannot be in between the boxes or outside of the boxes. So the way I do it very often is to represent this in a very graphic way using an IPA chart, obviously, and to say, look, say you're a Spanish native speaker, your eyes are right here in the middle. But in English, unfortunately, I'm going to need your eyes to be either very long and very tense or very short and very relaxed. Okay, so that's the first step. Basically, we start with the vowels and we try to make sure the people have this awareness. And this is where people tend to have like the biggest surprise. They go like, so wait, so there's two types of eyes? And I'm like, yes, there are two types of eyes. And I know you probably don't know about it because nobody told you before. Nobody had told this to me until the age of 25. So I'm aware that in many cases, this is not properly taught. This is not given to learners. Personally, I do believe this should be one of the first things given to anybody learning a language. What kind of boundaries are there when it comes to vowel and consonant sounds? This seems incredibly basic. So that's the first step. The next step, obviously, would be to talk about the notion of stress. Many languages do not have the notion of stress, or they apply stress differently. I mean, as a French native speaker, if I was listening to what my brain is telling me, I would just be stressing the last syllable in every word. So once you move to a different system, you need to understand how it works. And who says stress means also that some other syllables are going to be unstressed. So once we start talking about vowel reduction, unstressed syllable, schwas, and all of those things, we enter a completely new universe. And what you start seeing once you start teaching those very basic notions to learners is that very quickly they tell you, you know what, I've been watching this TV series that I watch every day, and I'm starting to hear the sounds that we mentioned in class. So you go from not even being able to hear the sounds to being like, I was able to identify the sounds in this word. Because if you are not told that a sound exists, you are way less likely to be able to hear it. And this is something that as teachers, we get to understand, obviously, that if you are not aware of the existence of a sound, your brain will automatically oversimplify the sound. So that's basically the steps. The steps is awareness, different levels of awareness that apply to listening and that also apply to speaking. And kind of magically, people develop the listening and the speaking together. So that would be the basic approach, let's say. More awareness, more practice, and obviously more immediate feedback offered to the person.
Mm. Yeah, I think it really makes sense on the level of neuroscience as well, because we know that our brain likes to make connections.
Mm.
That's how it functions. So it connects new knowledge to old knowledge, and it connects like to like, or like to different, and it likes to make all these kinds of connections. So I think if we can sort of recognize sounds that exist in our own language that are similar in the
Mm.
language that we're learning, that's one way we can connect things. And then identifying the sounds which, like you said, are slightly different or don't exist at all.
Mm.
No, so I
Yeah.
think it's quite nice to compartmentalize the sounds which are the same, the sounds which are slightly different, or the sounds which are don't exist
Mhm.
in our language at all. Because
Mhm.
then we can prioritize the sounds that we need to work on. If the sounds are the same, in more or less the same in both languages, we don't necessarily need to focus on that, because
Yeah.
it will come out naturally. Whereas if it's a sound that doesn't exist, like for me in Spanish, the R sound, I don't roll my R's, because I've never rolled my R's. And when I came to Spain, I tried to do it, and uh, I suppose I felt embarrassed because it didn't come out. I couldn't do it, so I just stopped trying.
Yeah.
And after 25 years, I've decided that I'm on a mission to resolve that, and I'm going to start rolling my R's, or try.
Look, if you find the solution to that, please teach it to me because I'm on a similar quest myself.
It's really
I've just
hard.
I've just dropped the ball a long time ago, and I'm like, I'm just gonna speak my R's, pronounce my R's like a French person, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, but that's probably more similar than an English R, though. So you're probably a little easier for you. So yeah, okay. So being systematic and identifying sounds, and then
Yeah.
thinking about things like stress,
Yeah.
which obviously is different depending on the different languages.
Mm.
And I love that what you talked about when you start to hear things.
Yeah.
So when you know about the sound, it's a bit like when you learn. It reminded me when you learn vocabulary in my community recently. We talk about vocabulary a lot, and we have this feature called Wednesday's Word.
Uh-huh.
And I happened to share a word which was lopsided, because
Ah.
I made a cake for my daughter's birthday, and it was lopsided. And then so we started talking about this word, and then one of the members sent a picture that she'd actually, when she was reading her book, it appeared the next day in her book. And
Uh-huh.
then, it's like you start to see things. So you start
Yeah.
to be, when you've got that initial awareness, then you start to have a broader awareness, I think, of it,
Yeah.
and you start to notice more, which is
Yeah.
what it's all about. No. Okay, great. So being systematic. Now, are there any specific tools or resources that you use with your learners to help them? Sorry,
The
can I just go back before we answer that
Sure.
question, because I just wanted to check that everybody knew what you were talking about when you were talking about the IPA.
Sure.
Because we take it for granted as teachers that people understand what we're talking about. I'm
Sure.
gonna put it in the chat box. Is there anybody who doesn't? Put in the chat box if you don't, so it's the The IPA is the, well, Johann, can you tell us what it is?
So IPA stands for International Phonetic Alphabet. So it's basically a standardized way to represent the different sounds that are used in any given language. So you have a different set of symbols that would be used for Spanish or for French or for English, and some of those sounds are similar and some of them have nothing to do with each other. The way it looks, mine is usually not far. Ah, here it is.
Elvira said no, but Elvira, you do know what it is.
Here it is. Looks like this, okay?
We've talked about
Okay.
it. Maybe it was
That's
the
the way
word
it
that you
looks
couldn't
like.
remember.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay, so that's the IPA. Well, it
yeah.
organizes the sounds, and it's actually organized quite logically when you look at it. And I think this is a really is a useful exercise to do, is to spend some time familiarizing yourself with the
Mhm.
IPA. Yes, that one, Elvira, that one. Because obviously it's organized into the vowel sounds, and the consonants, but within the consonants it's organized into minimal pairs, for example. So
Mhm.
there's the ones that we have, the p and the b, and the, it's not just random sounds put together in a table. It's actually organized in a specific way to help you with those sounds. So I think it's I mean, that's not something I ever looked at school. I had
Mhm.
no idea what that was until I became a teacher. And again, I think we're doing our learners a disservice by not giving them that information. We always talk about knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. And if you can give somebody something that they can then go on to use by themselves, then this is super powerful. you know but by not giving them that knowledge, we're holding them back, because they don't know that it exists, for one, and then they don't know, if they come across it, how they can use it to help them.
Correct.
So I think I know it looks scary, and whenever I do it with my students, they're like, "Whoa, what's that?"
What I do is that I usually fold it. So you start with this and it looks way less threatening this way, and then you
Ah,
start unfolding after.
very good, very good. I like that. I like that. Yeah, playing tricks with our minds.
Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely, I think that's definitely something that everybody should familiarize themselves with, if they can. Okay, so right then, I was asking you about, so we've got systematic approach, looking at the
Mm,
sounds,
mm,
then looking at the stress, looking out for things when we're listening
mm.
to series or TV, films or anything. Any other tools or resources that you recommend your learners use?
So obviously, everything I work with is usually custom made for each profile because we all seek something different. We don't all come from the same linguistic background. For example, I work with both native Spanish speakers and native Catalan speakers. Their needs are radically different. But if there's two resources I can recommend, and I'm putting them in the chat right now, it's a website called Anti-Moon, and on this website, you have a very nice IPA chart where you can click on each sound and listen to them, both British style and American style. So this is fantastic. And there is Youglish, but I'm sure Lisa knows about Youglish, obviously. So Youglish is basically to practice specific words or specific strings of words. So you give a word to Youglish, and it's going to go through all available YouTube videos and have you listen to the same word or the same string of words pronounced hundreds of times. So you can listen to it, you can repeat at the same time, and you can see how people with a slightly different accent or in a slightly different context pronounce the word. It's a fascinating tool, especially if you struggle with a specific word that if you always shift the stress, or if you don't know how to pronounce the vowels in that word, Youglish is a great tool.
Yeah, no, we use it in my community. I recommend it, it's so good because, like you said, you get all the different accents as well,
Mm,
which is part of the challenge of pronunciation, I think, is when
Hmm.
we're not familiar with an accent. And this happens in our first language as well.
Hmm.
I don't know, in the UK, there are so many different accents, and there are some which are very different to my accent. And, at first, I struggle to understand that person until you tune your ear in, and then you recognize, the sounds which are similar, the sounds which are different.
Yeah.
But that takes time, even in your, in your first language.
Yeah.
Sometimes I really struggled with, when I left Yorkshire, where I grew up. I went to university in Newcastle, which
Uh-huh.
is close to the Scottish border, and has a lot more in common with a Scottish accent than
Uh-huh.
with the English accent that I was familiar with, which was a
Yeah.
Yorkshire accent.
Yeah.
And it took me a while. I remember arriving there with my family, with all my things loaded up in the car, and we asked the way to the student accommodation, and not one of us in the car understood a word they'd said. Like, and that was before the days of GPS. So we
Uh-huh.
had to like get out our old road map and have a look at that, because we didn't dare ask anybody else, just in case we didn't understand their mind.
I mean, as a native speaker, yeah, that feels really terrible, right? I don't
Yeah.
understand my own language.
No, but no, but I think it's reassuring, because it's like, it's completely normal that we don't understand
That's
every
true.
accent,
That's true.
in
Yeah.
the world. It's about being familiar with things, and
Yeah.
and hearing things. So the more we can expose ourselves to different accents,
Mm.
I think the better. Because, I mean, we talk about this native thing.
Yeah.
uh, you know uh, Most people, there are far, far more people speaking English who are non-native than native speakers of English. And what we're using English for these days is global communication in global context. So
Hmm.
it's quite often non-native speakers speaking to each other to get stuff done, either in their business, in their personal life, whatever. So it's not all about, just understanding native speakers.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, right. Now, my next question. Now, this is something that I'm really interested in what you say, because I know that a lot of people who I work with struggle with this,
Yeah.
as did I for many years, and still do some days. Um, Tips for when we feel self-conscious and anxious about our pronunciation.
Hmm. Um, Most of the people I work with face some sort of language related trauma. Like these people have been mocked. These people have been told you will never be able to speak well. These people have been told because you're Spanish/French, it will be impossible for you to be fully understood. Uh, so when people come to me, they usually come with very low self-esteem. Like I've seen some really extreme cases of people in positions of responsibilities at work, very serious people wearing suits and ties, who were starting to just cry when they were talking about their practice of English. Like the trauma goes very deep. And many of these people feel very much threatened at work because what they're told sometimes is, okay, if you don't improve your English, you will never get that promotion. You will never get promoted. You will never become a manager. So there's a lot of pressure on them. So um, the first thing we all need to know is that, every non-native speaker has felt shame or fear at some point. Like we're all the same. Like I remember at the beginning when I was interacting with native speakers, having to prepare my sentence, like being like, okay, how am I going to be organizing this sentence to make it really nice and really correct? Okay. So that's perfectly normal. We should not be afraid of facing those fears. We should not try to hide them. That's a completely natural thing. And Lisa and I, we face this with Spanish, obviously, all the time. We're human beings. Um, Here's the thing, there is no cookie cutter approach to this when it comes to prawn or to confidence. Some people want more technical knowledge. Some people want to practice more. But I think really the key in there is to find someone you can click with, someone who can support you, someone who can be a partner, basically. Um, the way I work with my clients is that I know a lot of things about them because I always encourage them to speak about things that matter to them. And I think this is the first step. It's like helping them, giving them the tools they need to be able to talk about things that matter to them. And this is kind of the beef I have with language schools, because it's like, okay, we're going to follow this book and they're going to be talking about very random subjects that nobody really in the room identifies with. I try to go the opposite path. That is to say, I get to know you, I know what you care about, and we're going to talk about things that you care about. That can be personal, that can be social, that can be political, that can be anything as long as you care about it and you have this desire to express yourself. So for me, the one key to be able to get better at general English is to start talking about things that you really care about. Very niche topics that you're interested in, because very naturally you're going to remember more, you're going to memorize more, you're going to seek the vocabulary that you need also to talk about these topics. So for me, that's one key. I do this with my clients, but you can do it on your own also. Like, you don't have to work on everything. You don't have to know about every single topic. Start really with the things you care about, whatever it is. One of my students is a huge fan of knitting. She's always knitting. Well, we talk a lot about knitting, and that's fine and that's fantastic. Um, but you need someone to support you. You need someone who can give you both immediate and delayed feedback. So immediate feedback would be basically, you make a mistake, I need to wait for you to finish your sentence or to finish expressing your idea, and I will let you know, okay, this word would be better, or here you did not pronounce this one well. And delayed feedback would be like, your conversation partner is taking notes during the session, and at the end of the session, you say, okay, look, this is the list of the stuff that would be important for you to work on. So take this list. I've been writing the transcription using the International Phonetic Alphabet. You can practice the words at home. Try to reuse this vocabulary both in writing and in speaking, and we can talk about it next time. So I think really the key is like finding the right conversation partner. Because in the end, I think this is what we are, especially with more advanced speakers. Like, instead of coming and saying, today we're doing this, I like to be like, okay, that's the idea. That's what I would like us to talk about. But if we detect any issue, if we see that you have a doubt about this form of conditional, or if I see that you're not sure how to use a present perfect, we can talk about it. We can take 15 minutes and talk about this. So giving each person exactly what they need to be able to communicate. And I think this brings a lot of self-confidence, and people are just happy. I mean, one of my students told me something really beautiful the other day. She was absolutely traumatized by English. She's dyslexic also. So like, issues really piled up on her. And she was like, you know what? I'm actually enjoying my time. So she's enjoying her time and she feels good and happy speaking in English. And I'm like, this is my biggest victory, because it's not just you getting good, you're actually enjoying the time you're spending with me and the time you're spending also on your own, having your own conversations with other people or online, for example. So yeah, that would be my
Absolutely.
answer.
I think the people who know me, who work with me, will know that we've definitely got that in common. That it has to be something which is relevant and meaningful and that you enjoy. And very recently, I was in a situation with some students, and they were having such a good time together and doing something completely natural and normal, that one student, I've never seen this one student communicate so fluently. Their pronunciation was absolutely fine, completely intelligible, and because they were completely in the flow, not thinking about the mistakes they were making, not thinking consciously about the pronunciation, but thinking about the message that they wanted to give. What did they want to say? And I think if you can get that, then that's half the battle.
Yeah.
One thing that I found useful as a language learner is, for example, in my coffee breaks at work, which is when I have, I have most problems because I'm with my colleagues. It's quite, we have very little time. Everybody's busy, rushing off to classes and things. But it's when everybody's speaking Spanish, and it's often quite noisy because people are having different conversations. So sometimes it's difficult to listen. But when I really when I really hear a conversation that I'm interested in and I want to give my opinion, I want to join in the conversation, then um what I found useful is because people find it a bit awkward sometimes if you make mistakes and they don't know whether they can correct you or not. And what I found useful was giving my colleagues permission to correct me whenever they wanted, because I found it useful. And when I gave them permission to correct me, say, "Hey, it's okay, you can correct me. Don't worry about it." It was like the elephant in the room had disappeared, because there was always this thing, Lisa's making mistakes. Do we tell her or don't we? And it was like, it was uncomfortable for me and it was uncomfortable for them. So when I said, "Hey, don't worry, correct me,"
Uh-huh.
and I started to take myself less seriously and laugh at my own mistakes that I made, it was just a much lighter atmosphere in the room. And I think my pronunciation mistakes and my general language mistakes actually brighten people's day up because it gives them something to laugh at.
I mean, as long as you're able to create a safe environment, be it
Exactly.
in class or at work when you're around native speakers and you need to practice, as long as
Mm,
you're able to create this safe space, you will feel better about it. I was very lucky because I learned Spanish in Mexico. I was working in a very big school in there, meaning that there were like, I don't know, 25, 30 other teachers, and I became like the mascot of the school. Everybody wanted to teach me something. Everybody wanted to bring me something. So I was spending time in the teacher's room in the morning, 30 minutes, and I was learning my Spanish in there. And it was fantastic because everybody knew that I was really eager to learn and that I wanted to know about culture and the language both together, that I didn't want to split the culture from the language, which is something very important, by the way. When you're learning a language, never separate the culture from the language. Like, insist on the cultural aspects and the cultural factors if you don't want to get stuck at some point of your learning. Okay, fair,
uh,
fair warning.
I didn't know it was
So,
possible to split
oh,
it.
some people try very hard. Some people try very hard, but bad idea. So yeah, I agree with you, Lisa. That's fantastic to just tell, if you have the great chance of having native speakers around you, to tell them, hey, it's okay if you let me know when I'm saying something incredibly wrong, you know?
Mhm. And even other non-native speakers, if somebody
Yeah,
knows that it's a different
that's
way,
true.
why not? Your study buddy or whatever.
Absolutely.
Look, right, okay. I'm conscious of time, and I want to give people the opportunity to ask you questions
Sure.
before we go. So,
Yeah,
are you okay then? If I'm going to stop recording, are you okay to take questions from the audience?
absolutely. Yeah,
This
sure.
is the point where I ask them, and nobody has a question. If not, don't. Right, okay. I'm going to stop recording so that we've got a safe environment where people can feel free to ask their questions. Okay.